Fearless friends, it's Amy Schmidt, and I am excited to be hosting another episode today with an incredible guest. And I think someone, no matter what age, you're going to be able to relate to everything she has to say. She is actually a 5-time bestseller. She's written 7 books. She's a corporate account executive. She's also the host of the Brim to Shine podcast and has listens over 90 countries and is at the top 10% globally streamed. She is just an amazing human. I know her personally, and how many of us, before we even get into this, guys, can relate to constant striving to prove our worth and realizing that our value is never tied to what we achieve? That's what we're going to be digging into today. So, welcome to the show, Annie Mayfield. Hey, Fearless friends. As you heard in the intro, I've got a really cool guest today. And you know what I didn't mention in the intro is I actually met this guest in Atlanta where my son lives, and they happen to go to the same church. And it's funny. And so Annie Mayfield, welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you. I am stoked to be here.
I'm so excited. I told my husband this morning, I'm like, I'm so excited just to have her on. I watch you thrive. I listen to your show. You just have an energy and so many gifts that you've been given from God that just shine through you every day. So I'm thankful for that. But I want to go back to how I met you. And it's really a funny story. And I'm going to call out Noah on this because you know Noah, my son.
Yes, and, he's amazing for everyone listening. He's awesome in real life.
Exactly. He is a pretty good egg. He's friends with Annie just got engaged. So very excited because I actually know the human who she's marrying, and he's fantastic. Yeah. And like a Wisconsin fan, go Badgers.
Go Badgers. I never thought I'd say that, being homegrown from the South and never going further than South Carolina, but go Badgers.
You're going to have jump around at your wedding, I have a feeling. And Noah said to me, we talk pretty often, and he's living in Atlanta, and he said, Mom, I said, how's Hunter doing? He goes, he's so great. He's so great. And he met this fabulous woman. And he's so happy. And I'm saying that, and I'll say it, and everybody listening will hear this, and so will Noah, and he'll be like, yeah, I actually did say that. And I just thought it was amazing. So when I got to meet you, I had a little preview. You know how you do that. You kind of hear something, and you're like, oh, this girl sounds cool. You're just the whole package.
Well, okay, I remember that day too. And talking about the whole package, this is so funny. One, I'm so honored Noah said that about me because he is such a good egg. And so I feel like that just means so much coming from him. But 2, it was so funny that day we went to lunch, right? We weren't I was not planning on going to lunch with you guys because I wasn't sure what the situation was. Hunter and I were actually in a fight. We were in a fight that day.
Were you really?
Yes, it was over something so silly, so stupid. But honestly, being at lunch with you and with Noah, it gave us such perspective on what it means to just be around good people. And I'm not even kidding you. Whatever we were fighting about that day, it was something so silly. I cannot remember. But that's what after that lunch, we were like, man, that was an awesome lunch. You good? Because I'm good. And it was just so funny. But
okay, I love that. I love that. See, this is how stories start and that's so amazing. So amazing.
But I also wanted to say that because it's easy after an introduction of someone. I have a podcast. I introduce people all the time to think that they're the whole package means they're always perfect. I get in fights with my fiance. I don't feel perfect all the time. And I'm so human, you're so human. And it's just fun to have this conversation today.
Exactly. We're real people, we're real people. And but you're so authentic. And I love that. Let's talk a little bit about you because you have written 7 books. 5 of them have been bestsellers. I mean, honestly, take me back to these moments in your life. Let's just go back to the first book. How did you have that spark? How did you say, okay, world, I'm doing this. I'm putting pen to paper. I'm doing it.
That's such a good question. It's funny. Anything that I look back on my life and I'm like, that was definitely God, it was because the thing that I was doing, I felt like it was more for me than other people. I know my books have helped people, which I'm so grateful to be able to say, and you do so many things that help people, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts too. For me, writing the podcast, before anything, one, it makes me see God more. Like it makes me see the Lord more when I do it. And two, it helps me. Like I don't know who I would be if I wasn't writing. And I don't mean that from an identity perspective. I mean that from God has given it to me as this gift to reflect, to filter through things. I always say, you know, I know your family's super close. My family is super close. We live each of us a mile from each other. And now Hunter lives a mile from us. He's part of that crew now. But growing up, my dad, he was the one who got me to start writing because I was a super introspective kid. I had a lot of emotions and I would bottle them up. You know, everyone says in your teenage years, you either like lash out or you get super sad. I was the super sad one. I would just get so sad and I feel things so deeply and I get like really happy, but I also get really sad about things. And I was afraid of people seeing me hurting because I didn't want them to hurt. And so I would just hide myself. And I remember, I'll never forget, it was when I was going through the tennis recruiting process for college, which, you know, if you have a kid go through that, it's brutal. Like you just have coaches come basically look at you and tell you how not good enough you are all the time.
It's brutal.
It's brutal. And my dad was, things got really dark. And I remember my dad was like, Squirt, you got to talk to me. Like, what are you feeling? I was like, Dad, I don't think I can. So he said, well, why don't you just go write it down for me? And then I'll read it. That's what I do with your mom. When I feel like I can't talk to her, I just write things down and then I let her read it. And when I started writing, I was like, whoa, it was all of a sudden I had language for things I genuinely couldn't say out loud. And even to this day, when Hunter and I are in a riff, like I write him what I'm feeling and then he reads it because writing has always been this thing that is kind of an escape mechanism. And I feel so safe. And funny enough, so the books, when I was 18 and I was going through a lot of anxiety in college and I realized I started reading like self-development, faith development books. Not a lot of people my age were doing this. And I just thought, man, it'd be cool if like there was a book written by someone my age and maybe younger girls would realize that they could pick up a book like this. And it's not just for people that are older and wiser. It's like, no, you can have this wisdom now. And so honestly, I just went back to my old journal entries that I had been writing for forever and realizing, hey, like when I write a book, it's not me writing a book. It's just me writing maybe something I'm going through in the moment. And then somehow it ends up being a book. Yeah. So that's how it really all started, was like an emotional coping mechanism.
Isn't that, I think it's awesome. It's the same for me. Yeah. I mean, a couple of those things really resonated, and I think will resonate with the listeners and the viewers because I am such a deep feeler. Like you said that. You said, I feel so deeply. I do too. And it's a weight for me. That's just how I process things. Of my 3 kids, there's one that's more like that than the other 2. And it's interesting. And when I would put pen to paper and write, that's how it was very therapeutic for me. It really was. And so I can relate to that in so many ways. And I have to share with you and to everybody listening that, you know, I journaled as well. And I journal every day. I take time every day. I start my morning that way. I have a devotional I do, and I journal. And I do have to say, my kids will say, Mom, every day? Come on. Now, you're not, not every day. But 90% of the time I do, even if it's just a couple of words. Yeah. It sets the tone for the day for me. But my book, when I wrote it, it was also journal entries over time. It was my story. And it sounds like that was kind of for you too. It's your story. And my dad was very ill. He had Parkinson's, but I was living in Germany. And, these transatlantic flights are never late. And that happened to be late. And I didn't make it back to have a proper goodbye with my dad. And at that particular moment, when I was surrounded by all of my siblings and their spouses, and my spouse wasn't there because he had to stay in Germany with the kids, I had a panic attack. And I've never had a panic attack before. I did. I had to leave the room. I was feeling so many emotions of not having a proper goodbye. And I remember my brother coming out and kind of putting his arms around me and saying, first of all, Dad knew you were here. And second of all, write your story. Dad would want you to write your story. And when I did that, I think it was a process for me of healing grief, to be honest.
Yeah. Oh, like knowing your story. It's so powerful. And I think too, like, and people like you inspire me so much, because it's one thing to go through something hard. It's another to reflect on it to the point where you can communicate that with somebody else in hopes that your hard time is someone else's survival guide, for when they go through something similar. But it's so true. It's even funny, like this past month, that we were talking about this before, but like so many crazy health, just smack in the face challenges for me this month, like right after getting engaged, like being told I might have bone cancer, all of these things. And for me, not necessarily in the thick of things when the wounds are still raw, but when they start to callus, what always makes me heal is knowing I can use this to help somebody, even if it's one person. Like it's why I can't stop writing and I can't stop podcasting. Like for me, that's my vehicle of healing and giving back. For other people, it's like a mentorship program, or maybe it's like they're a teacher with young kids and they give or whatever have you. Like, you don't know, but I just feel like that's how we were designed to heal is in community, which requires vulnerability, but it's the biggest blessing.
Yeah. Yep. I completely agree with you. Let's talk about our worth, because, it's such a thing that I think at any age, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, your 70s, there's this part that we're always trying to be perfectionists, or we're always performance orientated. We're searching for that goal. I talk about it a lot in keynotes that I do. We have a goal, we reach it, but we're already going to the next one because this one's not good enough now. Yeah. Have you ever had that? And let's talk about that from a faith perspective as well, and how you manage, just being such an achiever. And you're a very high achieving young woman.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, thank you. Right back at you, sister. I think a couple of things there. One, it's a good thing to have goals, and drive comes from the Lord. Like fruits of, like, we are not called to a spirit of fear, but, like self-discipline is part of what we're called to. Like, it's a good thing to have discipline. It's a good thing to have drive. The way I always like to put it, and this is years in the making, and I will never be perfect at this, but like working from worth, not for it, and working from the fact I am already so loved, not to be loved. And yes, I mean, I remember you talked about panic attacks. I remember I was a psychology major in college, and I had published my first book my sophomore year. And we were literally studying panic like symptoms, attacks in psychology that semester. And I had published that book, went home for break. And I remember when the book came out, I had my first, it would not be my last, but my first panic attack, because I didn't know the idea for my second. And all of a sudden I was I was feeling so much love, the thing I was achieving for, and I didn't know how to sustain it. It was like, but what's the next thing? I'm going to lose this eventually. The next thing's going to happen tomorrow. People are going to be loving that person. I've got to have another thing in the pipeline that I'm going to be doing to feel good enough and to feel worthy. And I think there's such a fine line to dance there on that. Like, God calls us to do. God calls us to create. I mean, he is a creator, and we were made in the image of him. I think where you have to challenge yourself is, especially when it comes to doing things for God. I know a lot of pastors have been on my podcast, and they've talked about a challenge they've had in their work is getting too busy working for God. They forget they're called to walk with him. And you think about, as that pertains to faith, per your question, like anything I do, it is a constant reminder. When I say constant, it's not even every day. It is like every hour, because every hour I'm doing something. It's saying, okay, Annie, remember, before God wants you to do anything for him, be on this podcast, write that. He wants you to be his daughter. He just wants a relationship with you. And then you have to look at what that means. And luckily I won the jackpot with the dads in the world. Like, I love my dad. And so it's easy. It comes naturally for me to think that like my dad just wants a relationship with me. Before, like he like with tennis in college, he was like, you could quit tomorrow. Like, you're my squirt. Like, you're my daughter. Like, he loves me. And so that comes naturally. For some people that won't. But I think you have to look at, well, what does God say you are? He says, before I formed you, I knew you. It means you're known. You were intentionally formed. He took time on you. There's a reason you're here. And that's to be in relationship with him. And I think when you have that set, you have the nourishment to go and do. You know what I mean? Like, this just came to me, but I think about, and this might be gross, I'm sure a lot of women listening to this have babies or whatever, but like as a mom, like you're breastfeeding or you're giving them, like that relationship comes first before your baby ever has the strength to go and do anything, right? Like It's got to be a relationship first. That's how I kind of look at it, is like, now my source for what I do is God's love for me. I don't do what I do to get God's love for me, because that's essentially what we're after, is love. It's, Ben Stewart, do you know who he is?
Yes.
He's a cool preacher.
Yes.
He's great. He says the root of all addiction, and in my case, I've never done drugs, I've never done it, but like I've been addicted to achievement. And a lot of people aren't addicted to drugs or whatever have you, but they might be addicted to gossip or judgment, to, look at someone else's dysfunction, prevent them from seeing their own. The root of all addiction is the belief that I'm unloved and unlovable. And I think we're all just after love. And so when God gave you that before you did anything for him, it kind of frees you to operate from that space.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I love the way you said that. It's so true. Yeah. It's so true. I want to talk about, being a young woman and being so faithful and so faith-filled. It comes with challenges, right? Because at times, a lot of people walk away from, maybe they were raised as Christians and went to church and did all of that. And then maybe they walked away from it. Maybe their opinions changed. Maybe they were challenged in a way. Maybe they had circumstances that said, hey, God's not here. This would not happen to me if God was here. I don't get this. Let's talk about like how you have these conversations, especially with young women, because I think it's so important. As a believer myself, I think it's so important for you to share just how because you sprinkle this like confetti, you really do. It oozes out of you, and it's so wonderful. And how do you have conversations with people that are non-believers?
Oh my gosh. Honestly, what first comes to mind is even like recently. So Hunter, we have this tradition at the end of our day. We always ask, what's your favorite part of the day? And where did you see God today? And it actually is cool. It kind of holds us accountable to looking for God in our day, because I know he's going to ask me that later. And I say that because just the other day, it was about a month ago. So I was told I had bone cancer about a month ago, or likely did, and had to go through all these tests. And, it was hard. We just got engaged, and we wanted a quick engagement. And all of a sudden it was like, it might be a couple year long engagement if we want a wedding after treatment and all that. And I really wrestled with God. I mean, I was like, where are you? Why is this happening? And I remembered a preacher once said, like, in order to wrestle with God, it means you have to be close to him. So when you say people that, I feel like there's two camps here. There's the people that are wrestling with the Lord. To them, I would say, hey, your wrestle is your evidence that he's there. You're wrestling with something. It's not nothing. To people that are indifferent, that's another conversation. To me, that's the most concerning group of people that just don't even care. And the reality of it is, somehow along the way, something happened. Someone said something to them that it got that way. Andy Stanley always says, if the news of Jesus isn't good to you, it's not the news it was initially designed to be, because it is good news. But all that to say, this past season, when I was wrestling, we watched this movie. It's called Miracles from Heaven. And what I would say to a non-believer is basically this daughter, I don't know why we watched this movie at the time. I was going through what I did, but it was it was even my idea. And it was about this young girl that got cancer, and her mom, and they were in the cancer ward and all the stuff. It's beautiful. Jennifer Gardner's in it. And the mom was really struggling. I mean, really struggling. And that'll preach. Oftentimes what challenges our faith the most isn't what happens to us. It's what happens to our loved ones. Like, how could God let my XYZ go through this? And her preacher looked at her and said, listen, I have struggled through really devastating times with God and struggled without him. And I don't know why this is happening to you, but all I can say is it's more light-filled and hope-filled and easier to struggle with him. And that just really hit a chord with me. Like, that's the decision we have to make. It's not, are we going to struggle? It's not, are we going to have pain? It's, are we going to have pain with God?
Yeah.
And that's what I would say to them. And so for me, even when I had moments where I was like, Are you there? Are you real? Do you hear
We all
me?
do.
Are my prayers
Yeah.
10 back too? I just kept going to, you know what, God, at the end of the day, this is so devastating, but the only thing more devastating this is for me to feel like you're not there. And so I'm going to choose to have pain with you.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say to them.
Wow. I love that. I love that. That's a great perspective on it too. And it makes it very real. And for people listening, especially for maybe moms that are listening and their daughters or something, conversations about this, so important. So important. Let's talk about the comparison trap, because even in my 50s, you still have this. I mean, let's be honest. It's in middle school. It carries us all the way through. And I think women experience comparison much more than men. I think there's an aspect of it there, but women for sure. I mean, you set your day, maybe you're scrolling and you're like, oh man, how the heck did she do that? That's amazing. You're immediately feeling deflated. You're like, okay, talk to me about how you handle comparison. They've always said, Eleanor Roosevelt said, it's thief of joy. It's true. It is.
It is. It is. And it leaves like a pit in your stomach. I even think comparison, like you can tell when you're in, I like to call the death scroll hole, like especially on social media, but it physically leaves you feeling ill. Like you feel that pit in your stomach, like, oh my gosh, I had it yesterday, and you have to catch yourself. I think there's two types. There's comparison to other people, but especially I think with women, we compare ourselves to where we thought we should be in life by now.
Right.
We compare ourselves to previous versions of ourselves. I'm not as skinny as I was before I had kids. My body isn't operating as it was when I was in college playing sports. I'm not in where I thought I should be in my career by now, or whatever have you. And so there's two types. And I think I struggle with the latter. Like for me, growing up, I compared myself to other people so much as a young girl. Social media was a huge fire on the gasoline for that. What I honestly learned, I think through trial and error and just getting exhausted, is that my favorite scripture verse is Jeremiah 1:5. And this has helped me a lot with comparison. It's before I formed you, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. You are not going to be able to build a life that God gave the blueprint for somebody else to build. You're just not. And so even like us, we are both podcasters. If you say something, you could say the exact same thing I would say on my podcast, but the way God wired me and the way God wired you, someone will hear it completely different.
Yes. That's
why when people say I'm not going to start a podcast, Amy's already doing that, Annie's already doing that. I don't want to, the space is so crowded. No. God pre-fashioned you to say something in the way you were meant to say it. Someone else to listen and hear it in the way they were meant to hear it. And so we're called to be obedient to what God called us to do. And we spend so much, I use a treadmill analogy. When you're running on a treadmill, try looking all over the gym. You are going to lose so much energy so fast. But if you focus on one point ahead of you on a treadmill, you'll have more energy to run more mileage than you would previously. Why? Because you're focused, you're concentrated. And we spend so much energy looking at what everyone else is doing. It's taking away from us walking our own life in step. That includes with where we thought we should be right now, with how we thought we should be doing right now, with these false standards we create for ourselves based off of what other people have preset or what we previously have been able to do.
Right.
The other thing I'll leave people with, and this is typically at least for me, this helped a lot with comparison. Anytime I see someone who is doing something amazing, for me, I still getting jealous of people doing something I want to do, but I can't in the season. We're human.
We're human. Yep.
We're human. I ask myself the question, what did they have to say no to in order to say yes to this? Because no one does everything. For me, I've written 7 books. Yes, I'm 26, but guess what? I was not in a relationship for years because I couldn't handle it. I did not have the time to date. I had to say no to that. And there are friends of mine that are well into their married years now. And I remember being like, God, I would love to get married someday. And I don't know if that's going to happen for me because I don't have time for it, but they did. So there's always, no one has it all. It's not possible. God didn't fashion us to have it all the time, or else we wouldn't need him. Right. So it's asking what did they have to say no to say yes to that? And then looking at, maybe they had to say no to all these things that I'm getting to do in my life.
That you're getting to do. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
Exactly.
You know?
I think that's a great perspective. You know, you wrote a book called Single. Now you're engaged. I know there's a lot of people out there. It seems like that's really challenging. I got married. I mean, I married Tim right out of college. 2 years after we were married. You know, it was that way. It seems as though, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn here. This is not with any data to support it, but it seems like women are waiting longer to get married.
Yeah.
I think that there's some more challenges around dating. Maybe because of social media, maybe because of these online apps. I know a lot of people use them, and I had an expert on a couple of years ago on my show and talked about it. I'm like, wow, I think I'd be using one. I mean, it made sense when she really walked me through these dating apps. But talk me through that book, Single, because that was where you just had a period in your life where you said, I'm gonna write this because I think this can help other women that are like me right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny. That was the book I did not want to write. And I'm sure you know this from like, it's typically the things God wants us to do. You're like, really? Like, can we not? Like, I do not want to do that. And I think a lot of the reason being was because I think I didn't want to be known as the single girl because I didn't want to be that. Like I wanted a relationship. And I say that because it's easy to look at someone that wrote a book on singleness, like Single Not Incomplete, and say, man, they're totally gung-ho about their singleness and they're so content with it. And like all that to say, I think what I've recognized is singleness is hard. Being in a relationship is hard. I'm sure one day I'll say marriage is also hard.
Absolutely, you will.
Absolutely, I will. And I think though, it's funny, Hunter and I did like a singleness podcast with someone, and we were talking about
I listened to it.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. So this is what I said, and this is what I think, like, because a lot of times people, I think the goal is if they're single, well, you know what? God has me here. Let me learn to be content here. Let me learn. And that's the goal. That's not the goal. Like when you're in a relationship, you're not in a relationship. The goal is always to seek the Lord. Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom. Like we're called to seek God, which means it doesn't matter if I'm single, if I'm in a relationship, I'm always going to have trials. I'm always going to have struggles. What matters is that I'm seeking the Lord. So no matter what my relationship status is, I'm doing the same thing and I'm called to the same thing. And God made it that way for a reason because life changes. And there's a gift in knowing God's our only constant. And people are waiting later. It is so hard to date. I try the dating apps and, there's a lot of success stories. Lots of success stories. I was at like 3 weddings in the past couple of years. They met on dating apps. I think though, a lot of that goes back into, funny enough, our previous conversation on comparison. I think like having so many options is not a good thing. And that's my concern with them.
Probably
it's like
true.
when you find one little thing wrong with the guy you met, it's like, well, there's 1,000 more where that came from on a dating app. And what I've just like, when I got off of them, what I recognized is like, and I kind of had like we're doing like a fast from dating is like, when a really good guy came along, and Hunter is one of a kind. So he really is. But I noticed it. And when things got hard, in my mind, okay, there's a lot more of Hunter where this came from. And so there's pros and cons, but I think at the end of the day, like getting on them, not getting on them, that's not the question. The question is, are you seeking God? And if you are seeking God, I think God is not limited to how we choose to date in this world. Right. He can move through a dating app or off it. But it's like seeking first his kingdom is what we're called to do.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I love this conversation. We're running out of time, which I'm so sad because we have so many more things. I have like 6 other bullet points here to get to. But we'll have you back because you're so amazing and you just have this spark and energy. And I hope everybody listening follows you. And I got to be honest, if people reach out to you, because you have a huge following, do you get back to everybody? Like I had to set boundaries on certain things. I used to say I'll get back within 24 hours. And now I'm like, no, I need to process, take time, all of those things in 48 hours. But do you get back to everybody that reaches out to you? Because you must just be inundated.
Well, so I actually have it's funny you asked. Same thing. I was very much adamant about like getting back to people and messaging people. Then I found that was taking up way too much of my time. And the reality of it is, it's not just that. Sometimes people reach out and it's not kind things. It's not an ask.
Yes, right.
And so you do have to set boundaries. And so I changed my settings to where I only get messages from people I follow back. But I do try to like basically every Friday, that's my day. I'll go into my requests and just comb through and see like if it's somebody with mutual followers or whatever have you. So all that to say, but I am on Fridays, if I do get back, it's typically there. Now though, where I get back most often, like if someone has a question or it's actually commenting on my podcast launch. So you can do that now on like Spotify, you can comment on episodes. And that's where I typically get, cause I know, people are actually like watching full episodes versus just sending rude comments about something on social media I was wearing or whatever.
Exactly.
So I respond to those.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. Good info. All right. Before we close today, I'll have everything in the episode notes, all of your books, because we didn't even get to You Matter. We didn't even talk about your latest one. And I'm sure you have another book that you're already working on. We'll have you back for that. But I want to ask you something because I ask, my guests are usually older. I've had some younger guests on your age, but I want to ask the same question and see what you would say. So if you were sitting on the couch, Annie, and you looked over and there's a younger version of yourself, what advice would you give her?
Oh my gosh. So emotional. I think I would first just tell her it's going to be okay. Like deep feeler. I've always been a deep feeler, which means I also am a deep thinker and I can tend to overthink and just freak out about things that haven't even happened yet. But I think I would tell her, I would ask her, like, what is so hard about giving yourself the grace that God gives you every day? And that's what I would ask her. It's like, you don't have to do it all. You don't have to be it all. God gives you grace. What makes you think you can't give yourself grace? That's what I'd say.
Wow. I love it. That's a mic drop for me. Thank you, Annie Mayfield. I love you. You're amazing.
I love you too. Come back to Atlanta.
I will be. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, but not on a Sunday. But yeah, for my double Nichols birthday. Yeah, I'll be in Atlanta having dinner with Noah. So yeah, pretty excited.
Double Nichols. Oh
double
my gosh.
Nichols.
Well, it was a pleasure being on.
Thanks so much. All right, we'll be in touch. Thanks so much for listening today. We know how valuable your time is, and that's why we keep it short and sweet. Don't forget to follow us on all the socials, and you can check out all the links and resources in the show notes. Until next time, go forth and be awesome.